Welcome to Life After Business, the podcast where your host, Ryan Tansom, brings you all the information you need to exit your company and explore what life can be like on the other side.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Life After Business podcast. This is episode 141. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to own a restaurant? If you're like me or you're like most of the people out there, you've been sitting at dinner, having a cocktail going, man, I should own a restaurant. I swear everybody's had that thought, but then everybody knows the stats, or you've heard someone say restaurants are the worst business to own. It'll put you under, it'll suck the soul out of you. It's a cash business, it's in people, and there's always a bunch of challenges and headaches. Yes, that is true. And yes, that is true of all businesses. And what Matty O'Reilly, who is our guest today, proves wrong about the restaurant business is that it can be extremely profitable and lucrative if you approach it right. Matty O'Reilly was one of the Twin Cities Business Magazine's 100 People to Know in 2019. His restaurant holding company, O'Reilly Custom, clocked over $10 million in revenue in 2018. He's flipped over a dozen restaurants, and one of them he bought and sold for 40 times return on his investment, and he never paid over 80 grand for any of them. This episode is absolutely must listen to if you're interested in the restaurant business, if you've always wanted to know how to potentially do it for a profit, and then hearing how you can do this with very little money down and approaching the restaurant like a normal business and doing things the right way can be fun and lucrative. Before we kick into the episode, there's a couple updates that I want to give everybody. The first one is we are tentatively got our book launch date. So if I have not mentioned, we have been really working hard, we being me and my partner, Jim Carlisle, on building out and writing this book on how to grow and exit your company. The book title is called Ripcord, How to Grow and Exit Your Company. Our launch date tentatively is September. So we're getting really, really close. And what it does, it takes the 5 growth and exit planning principles and the process, and it gives it all away. Like, here it is. I want this to be out in the world so owners know how to grow and exit their company. They can hire the right team of advisors. They can do this right. So pretty pumped about that. And the second update is we are launching a growth and exit planning accelerator. So what that is if you are interested in understanding how to grow and exit your company the right way, we are taking those 5 principles and the process, and we are putting it into a 12-month cohort program. So there's a start and there's a stop. It's meeting once a month for a half a day. Our first one is being launched in the Twin Cities here in Minnesota within the next 90 to 120 days. And it's specifically for people that are looking 1 to 5 years out, and you want to grow the value of your company. You want to build a team of advisors, understand the valuation target that you're marching towards, understand the exit that is going to come to the forefront that makes the most amount of sense for you. This is for you because we're giving you all the knowledge, all the resources within the framework that we have built, but your commitment is only a half a day once a month. And you're able to level up your knowledge so that way you can hire the right team and do a lot of this yourself. And you get to help a group of entrepreneurs that are also going through the same stuff. So with that being said, I really hope you enjoy this interview with Matty.
This episode of Life After Business is sponsored by GEXP Collaborative. Their proven process gives you clarity on all of your exit options and how those options impact your financial success, timing, and future happiness. Sell your company on your time frame to the buyer of your choice at the price you want.
Matty, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great.
So I'm glad that what was on record, what we were just talking about, was not on record, because we have a lot of mutual friends that we were talking about. We got introduced. You're in the executive MBA program at St. Thomas with one of my friends, Scott Zaplecka. I'll give you a shout out. And so we'll leave that off the record. But for the listeners that might not have heard of you or didn't see you on the Twin Cities Business Journal paper recently, give us a little bit of your background and what you're doing now. And then even kind of going back, you said you were doing some fun things, Matty, in a band. And so just kind of curious on some of the big highlights of the background.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Twin Cities, and while I was in college, I started working in the restaurant business, and it was a crazy story. So I might as well lead with this because it sort of inspired me to consider this as a profession. So I was a sophomore in college, and in the summer I got a call at my I was staying at my parents' house, and I got a call at midnight on a Tuesday night at my parents' house, which is really weird. I was 19 years old, and my dad answered the phone, and he woke me up, and it was the bar manager from Champs in Minnetonka, and that just opened, and it was really, really busy. And a friend of mine worked there. He's like, "You got to come work here. Put in your application. I'll see what I can do." And I went and dropped off my application, and the host just laughed at me almost. She said, "Yeah, there's a stack like of 300 of these, so good luck." And just so I walked out kind of deflated, and then woke up in the middle of the night basically, and to this call, and the bar manager said, "Hey, Matty O'Reilly." I'm like, "Yep, that's me." And it's like, "It's really late on a Tuesday. Like, what's going on?" He's like, "Well, I'm looking at your application, and we'd like to bring you in for an interview." And I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "Well, actually, we'd like to bring you in." And I'm like, "All right." He's like, "Can you be here in a half an hour?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Our bar back cut his hand, and he won't be able to finish his shift. So he's like, if you can be here in a half an hour, you got the job."
Mhm.
So I was like, "What's the uniform? I'll be there." And I borrow my parents' car, and I drove there and worked until 3:30 in the morning, and I got paid with basically they just people bossing me around like, "Get some beers and get some ice," and it was just this packed, busy place. So I got paid that night in just coins, just the change, and it was 4 pitchers, like beer pitchers full of just the
Sold.
change. And I'm like, and I didn't know how much it was. It could have been $50, and it was $250 and just change. And I'm
Oh,
like,
no kidding.
it was amazing. So that was like my first night and sort of exposure to the industry, and it was just super dynamic and fun. I ended up working there for almost a year and a half, and it was through college, and it was just exciting, and every day was different. And then it came to my senior year, and I either had to pick an internship somewhere else to sort of fulfill my to get my business management degree at St. John's. And so I asked the owner and the manager of Champs if I could just do my internship on the hospitality industry and use them as an example, because I wanted to keep working there because it was so fun. It was so much money. And so I basically I did my final internship and paper on the hospitality industry my senior year in college. So I kind of had this, base of knowledge, and I was starting to gain some insights into it. And then I had this real world sort of exciting entry into it and the experience of it, of working there. So I was kind of drawn to it in a unique way, that I had this sort of, I was starting to get to know the framework of how tricky it is and the challenges that went into it. And then I was actually working in one too. So when I got done with college, I had a couple of jobs that I really didn't love. And I just kind of called a few friends and sort of fell back into the restaurant business, worked as a server for a couple months, and then I got promoted to manager, and then I got promoted again, and then I switched companies, and I basically just, for about 10 years, just worked my way with some pretty smart, methodical moves with just better restaurant companies in the Twin Cities, until I finally just developed enough confidence and experience to know that I kind of wanted to do this for a living. So I worked for other people for about 10 years in management, and then I've worked for myself in the restaurant business for almost 16 years now.
Well, and I'm super excited to dive into this. So, because first of all, we don't have to go too much about it. I can't believe you're a Johnny, so I am too. And the fact
Oh
that you're
yeah, we didn't put that together. That's
no,
awesome.
the fact that you are going to St. Thomas for your master's is unfortunate, but um, so
Don't hold it against me.
yeah. So, so well, because I want to dive into it, because you're doing a lot of really, really interesting things that you've been doing by yourself in the restaurant industry. But what I'm curious, Matt, is like it's so funny because I go back to because I've been, grew up in an entrepreneur family, and I always wanted to run my own companies. And so many people that kind of start in that mindset, like I'm going to own a restaurant because it's the thing that they always see. Then everybody says, don't ever get into the restaurant business, right? Because it's people and cash and blah, 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 blah. What is it like as you work for people over the last, those first 10 years? What was so exciting about it? And what did you love about it? that led you into starting your own deal?
It's a great question. So mine was more just about my introduction to it. I was always, intrigued by the industry. And I think a lot of people are, I would say, in today's
Mhm.
age versus the age that, the era that I was, sort of building my years of experience. There was no chef's table or top chef, or there wasn't this exposure to the industry that we have today. So I think that there were less people in my era. So I graduated college in 1992. There wasn't the visibility and sort of the drama and excitement of what the perception of the industry today looks like didn't really exist back then. It was considered more of almost like a blue collar thing, as
Mhm.
opposed to the celebrity chef type experience from a
Interesting point.
career trajectory. So there were no there weren't very many chef schools, and if there were, they were on one of the coasts, and it was very perceived quite a bit differently than it is today. I think that's part of it. So and I came from the kind of the opposite, where my dad was just a hardworking, amazing, guy, but he was a hardworking commercial insulator, worked in construction my whole life, and was in a union and in that trade for 40 plus years. So, well, I worked with him in college before over summers and on J terms, and he basically talked me into at least considering doing something that I was passionate about, because I think very different era.
Right.
Also, where my sister and I are the true Irish twins. We're 11 months apart, and he's like, back when you two were born, he's like, I needed a job, and I got one, and he's like, and then it just life happens, and he just kept working, and he did really well by staying loyal to his profession and career, and but he also during the times that we worked together, he kind of reminded me, he's like, a lot of people whose sons work in my trade end up doing what their dad does, and just be really conscious that you've got a lot of options to just find your passion and find what you truly want to do. So so I was drawn to the industry. I think it was a lot of people are. I just liked I'm I'm a introvert, but I also I didn't like the idea of being trapped like in an office or the four walls of a of a
Mhm.
of a building. I like the idea of being on my feet. I like the idea of having both the creative aspects of something, as far as like when I started working for myself too. It was I'm a pretty good, I can draw, I'm creative, I'm a musician, but I also have this sort of analytical. I was always a math, I started college as a math major, so I have this sort of best of both worlds
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
using both sides of the brain. And this restaurant industry, I think a lot of attention gets put on this conceptual design. Like, it's almost everything is like, what's the name, what's the logo, who's the chef, and that gets all this attention. But a lot of the real work comes from managing these numbers and just
Mhm.
knowing what to do with them, and knowing how to write a pro forma and just analyze a P&L, and just sort of get, that's not the glamorous part, but it's probably that balance that I have. It kind of at least gives me my own advantage. When I look at things, I don't just look at them from one angle. I can look at them from multiple angles. So I liked all the aspects of that. I liked sort of digging into the numbers, because I think that's where a lot of people get in over their head, is they just don't understand. They come up with a really good idea. They have a really talented chef, and they just don't sort of fulfill the economic aspects, or the sort of the financial aspects that go into these things. They think they see other restaurants succeeding, and they sort of piece things together to get them up and running, but they really don't critically look at sort of the data and the
Mhm.
analytics that go into what makes these things work.
Are you familiar with the book The E Myth?
No, not yet.
So it's written by Michael Gerber, and it's short for the entrepreneurial myth. And what I love about that book is they say that a lot, and I think the restaurant industry is very a perfect example of this, where a lot of people in the trades, or a lot of entrepreneurs, they were working for the man, and they had this entrepreneurial seizure, and then like, I don't want to work for the man anymore. So then they go out and do it on themselves by themselves. And so like in the restaurant example, it'd be like, okay, I want to do this, but then like or in a perfect, I think the book in the example is the plumber. The plumber then gets more busy, so they hire more plumbers. and they hire more plumbers, and then they don't realize that, wait a second, I need AP, AR, HR, operations,
Right.
finance. like I wanted to just be a plumber. And so like there's this whole like, I think the restaurant industry is probably, based on what you just said, is probably similar victim of a lot of people that just really, really enjoy the experience and don't realize that it's a machine that kicks out cash.
Oh, it's totally true. I'll elaborate on that because I could probably rant about just this thing for the whole hour, and I won't. I'll try to refine it and distill it down into the keeping it to the point. But we're like the difference between the plumber and what I do is there's literally the restaurant industry has no barrier to entry. So if I wanted to be a plumber and I went to a bank with $500,000 and just said, "Hey, I want to open my own plumbing shop." They're like, "Are you a plumber? Did you go to school for it? Do you have your license? Are you certified to do this work?" And they would just look at my $500,000 and just laugh at me, So, but
Hmm.
if the plumber wanted to open a restaurant tomorrow, they with a 500,000, so dollar for dollar, two people can walk into a bank and with the same amount of money and say, "I want to do that profession." The plumber, no one would stop that plumber. Nobody. They would just let them do, "Oh, so daydreaming here? Sure thing. We'll help you. No problem." And they just take the money and then they get into so beyond the struggles of taking your skill set. So in my business, say you're a chef and you get fed up and you're just like, "I can do this. If this guy can, I can. Or if this,
Uh-huh.
if this person can, I can." But they don't see the layers of what they're getting themselves into. If they're a chef and they're a great chef, it doesn't
Hmm.
mean they're a great bookkeeper or they're a great negotiator, lease negotiator. It doesn't mean they're great at finance and know how to structure the right, deal over the course of time that will make this place profitable. They're just so reliant on kind of the assumptions and sort of the intuition, which gets you to a certain point. But that's where I've been coaching a lot of people, on the side. And what I hope to do after school is really sort of dive into this space of sort of clarifying that we're dealing with an industry that has no barrier to entry. So if a brain surgeon, an accountant, and a plumber and a restaurateur all go to the bank, all four of those people could open a restaurant. But the
So
restaurateur couldn't do any of those other professions. And that's where, I it's a portion of the consulting company I'm
yeah.
creating is to really just minimize and basically reduce the failure rate in restaurants. Part of it is really getting in touch with the lenders, the landlords, the investors before they jump into something that they don't really get all the data and the facts.
Hmm.
So those are a few examples I've worked on with a couple of my current bankers. Are they basically confidentially would show me a business plan, and I said, were you going to say yes to this? And they're like, "Well, we like it. They're fully funded. They have this chef, and I'll just either 50 lines on a pro forma that I can just say, well, they're trying to make the bottom line look pretty to get the investor, but it's not accurate. Like they're just letting anybody into this realm without really anything other than the pile of money that someone has in the bank or the group of investors that's behind it. Like there's really no one stopping people from doing it. So it's contributing to the failure rates. It contributes to the stats that make this seem like a challenging industry. And if you back all of that out,
Hmm.
I don't think it's any more challenging than it would be, but it really contributes to who gets a loan and why. It's really just, I'd say it's skewed and maybe flawed in a
Well, and
way
it's
where
interesting
there's
that
no education.
right.
There's
Well, and I think what is interesting too is that, which you bring up a ton of really valid points, and I will also resist going down a rabbit hole here, but I think it's also because bankers are pushing for loans because they need to make their commissions and they've been, begging for stuff on low interest rates for the last 10 plus years. And
yeah,
because most bankers are just salespeople, then there's definitely a select bankers that are financiers and or entrepreneurs that get it. And so I'm not generalizing too much here, but is they also, a lot of the loans is because the banker has to understand what you're doing, and restaurants are very tangible. It's like, oh, I get it. I go to restaurants a lot. Sure. Versus like, a banker trying to approve a loan that they just have of a business model of making widgets. Like, I don't really know. Or like, there's a bunch of banking problems right now, and very, very viable online companies that have been producing ridiculous amounts of cash flow for years, but the bankers go, I don't really get it. And so it's like, so then they can't get the loans for the stuff of a very, very valuable business too. I think it's an interesting, never really thought about it that way. I didn't know it was that easy for them to spin up a restaurant.
Yeah, you could not much barrier to entry. I mean, you have to, have a clean, a record to get a liquor license. You have to be able to fill out a pretty lengthy, liquor license application. And other than that, you could basically pay an attorney to get you through a few,
Hoops.
hurdles, hoops there, but it's relatively easy compared to other professions. Like I said, if I wanted to be a carpenter, I can't just put a sign in my garage. It's like
Yeah.
there is some skill there, and there's some, an education piece, and there are, there's a school to go to get, there are a lot of professions that basically you just need a certificate. You'd probably need more education to be a restaurant broker than you do to own a restaurant. Like
Probably.
actual
Yeah.
classes, you have to pass your real estate exam, and I mean, there isn't one of those to do what I do for a living. So I think once again, to sort of get to the sort of the root of the problem, at least from a consulting side, because I've got a good approach to this too. I've diversified my company in a pretty cool way, so I know lots of different segments of the industry and lots of different. I didn't just get
Well, let's do that for
follow.
the listeners, man. Sorry to interrupt. Let's go.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's give them give them an overview of, so when you started 16 years ago, what is the businesses that you built, and like what was your model towards restaurants, and then how have you kind of taken that, and like how has that evolved? And before or somewhere in the mix of there is, what was your and how was your approach different? Like, so when you went off on your own, you said, okay, because I know you've got a very specific approach on how you look at all this stuff, but maybe
Mhm.
start with, okay, here's kind of the highlights of what I've done over the last 16 years.
Sure. Yeah, my first place was a little cafe, downtown Excelsior, the city of Excelsior, really really quaint, cool town right off of Lake Minnetonka. And it was an existing business that I bought, and it was a kind of a coffee shop, like wine bar hybrid. And they were the only game in town. It was there for 6 years before I bought it. It had two different owners within those 6 years, and analyzing the business outside looking in, I noticed that two chain coffee shops opened up within the one within blocks of this place, and the other one within the mile of the place. So I saw this I call it a trend at the time, was just this Starbucks, Dunn Brothers, Caribou Coffee just popping up left and right. They were kind of
Mhm.
over saturating this market. So this independent coffee shop that was super vibrant and reliant, and the town was basically reliant on this one place. Their sales were just cut in half. And it was like, once you're open for 3 years, and then a heavy hitter competition comes in 2 blocks away, basically takes half your volume. How do you react? Like, how, at some point, how do you get adaptive once you have a business plan and a strategy and things are going well? And a disruption like that for a lot of operators, whether you're new to the business or not, is can be really challenging. So coming in from the outside, I approached that one with a rebrand, and it was the place was, arguably in decline at that point too. So the price to me, which ended up being more or less my game plan moving forward, was to be really conscious of spending up front too. I think a lot of people get in over their head with a lot of debt that they can't handle, and their high hopes of sales and revenues that don't
Mhm.
ever materialize. So I think I'll come back to that. So with this place, we basically just affordably and rebranded to give it sort of this new life. And we switched the model from counter service to table service. And at the time, you had this very different equation from minimum wage. What it was at the time was, was when I bought that in 2004, I think it was less than $5 an
Isn't that
hour
crazy?
to pay a server. Today it's, it's in the nines, and it's about to be 15 in Minneapolis in the next 3 years. So with but a barista at the time was making 9, 10, $11 an hour. So I'm like, well, let's look at this. If I could reduce labor, by switching the concept from counter service to table service. Not only am I paying people to be on the floor, but I'm paying them half as much.
Mm-hmm.
Table service should and could generate more sales per guest than a coffee shop. So I'm basically increasing sales and decreasing labor by making this one switch. So we basically just kind of uplifted the food statement there, dropped in table service instead of counter service. We never really lost the coffee shop. People kept coming in there for coffee, but if they wanted it to go, then we just kept doing it to go, but didn't really. But I'm paying people at this point $5.15 an hour, but they're selling 4 to 8 times as much as what they used to, because they're on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
We're selling drinks and an extra glass of wine and dessert, and we're able to elevate the price points because it was made to order food instead of food sitting in a case. So we basically just kind of, and that was more or less, that decision was free. It was the same space, the same tables and chairs, the same kitchen. And it was the way we used it, basically increased sales and decreased labor. And that was just out of the gate, I wouldn't say out of the gate, it was busy, but over the course of time, the structure that we created there was just more viable than battling with the competition that had a better name recognition, buying power. You can't compete with someone, dollar for dollar with Starbucks. You can't. And, they're now maybe this third wave coffee movement, like you've got a chance here with a different audience in the way. But back in 2004, you're almost hopeless in this situation to sort of compete with these brands. So basically transitioning the concept and being creative in the use of the space and how it served that community, and just getting that alignment, that conceptual alignment right, was really kind of just a thoughtful approach. But once again, these moves are free. Like it didn't cost me a dime to make that switch. It was basically just realigning the four walls of this space with how it served food. People are going to come in there, they're going to eat and drink. That's pretty basic. How are they going to get the food? The structure of how I paid people. The servers were happy because they used to make $10 an hour and they'd make $20 in tips. And now they make $5 an hour, but they make $100 in tips. And they're on a shift. So it's kind of this win-win, situation. Yeah. So that was easy. We were able to, over the course of 12 years, almost, quadruple more than quadruple the sales that were there before, just from this switch and the commitment to that switch. So it was good for the town. It was very good for the four walls of that business, and the rent structure. The rent structure that was originally created was sort of based off of this coffee shop volume, not this sort of cafe, wine bar, live music. We had the register ringing from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. So we're paying flat rate rent. So it was the rent percentage was so healthy. And once you can sort of identify and pinpoint those opportunities of, like, if my rent is fixed and I'm paying it, it's not a variable, rent rate.
Does it fluctuate with other bars and restaurants?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of different structures in place, and I've done a lot of them where they were percentage rent was built into the equation, or a combination of a base rent with a percentage. And then I had in one case, it was if I hit a certain sales threshold, I paid a certain percentage over that, because everyone knew that if we got to that point in sales, we were all winning, we were all succeeding. So it was kind of tying the landlord and the broker on that deal into the success of the place. Was once it hit a certain threshold of sales, a percentage hit on top of that, which still kept it really healthy, and was that sort of the number that the landlord wanted to get in the first place. I entered into that deal. This deal might not be economical for us, but if I get to this certain amount of sales, you'll get your number and I'll be making mine. So it was to be creative, to at least approach those in a bunch of different ways. So a lot of times these flat rent, fixed rents really work for businesses that are thriving. And I've been a part of a few, and where they kind of push the limits of, being healthy for everybody. And that's, you always kind of want that win-win.
Super cool. Yeah. So let's give us the framework of okay. So over the 16 years, like, what was your, like, how many? Because you were in flipping restaurants and also doing a lot of other stuff, right? And like obviously then there tactics that you learn like that. Because I want to dive into some more of that stuff. But What overall, like, what's the kind of the big picture of what it is? How many restaurants? What was the overall strategy, and how did you go from that first cafe? And then what was the like? What were you striving for? And then what were the big milestones?
Yeah. So what after the first couple years, I kind I was things were going well, and I just had this picture. Like I'm like I've worked for people that grew. Sort of this methodical growth was always this sort of in the back of my mind of like when the timing's right, or if the right deal comes along. So I'll touch on that for a little bit and hopefully come back to it too.
Mhm.
I'll also clearly say right now that there are just about the same number of available second generation restaurants every year since I started working for myself. There are never any more or any less available. So, and I'm talking about things for sale, things that are empty, just waiting for someone to sign a lease, things that have gone under. Let's just say the volatility of the industry leaves a very static amount of available inventory of second generation restaurants. And when I
Mhm.
say second generation, someone went in before me. Then this, I'll get to my ultimate, plan and message here. Someone went in before me and spent all the money basically to build out a restaurant that was never a restaurant before is the investment. Like you can't do it
Yeah.
cheap. So if you're taking an office space and turning it into a restaurant, the costs that go into that, they're astronomical in my mind. And then people do it and they still do it. I'd argue that once someone has spent that money and the life cycle of a restaurant kind of runs its course, and or someone just changes their mind and they don't want to do this anymore, the available inventory of second generation restaurants has yet to change in my career working for myself. So if I can count on that, I'm in no hurry or panic to jump into a project, because even if I was looking to grow, I can count on the fact that there will be an empty space sitting there that's going to be a great value. So that's my pet peeve in the restaurant business is it basically goes against most principles of simple business, which are just the buy low and sell high. Nobody does that. And it's really strange. It's like you almost have to start high to make your mark and then just literally cross your fingers that you've made the right choice, as opposed to my approach, which was get I'm taking over these places for sometimes $0. They literally outfitted with kitchen equipment, furniture. Like I'd go into these places and basically just realign the concept under contemporary standards and over the and or the needs of that neighborhood, that basically diversify the concept from everything else
So
with
let's dive
almost
into
no money. so like
right, right,
so
right, right, right. And I'm like, I'm
it's
so intrigued because like
yeah,
so
it's so easy, but I don't see a lot of people doing this, and I wouldn't recommend someone who didn't have experience like me to
Mhm.
go do it. But these opportunities exist, and it's helped me.
Let's go into like I'm so curious. So like okay, like you're looking at it like let's take it back to all right, you're gonna try and find a new place. What is the like the cities, the demographics, the business, like what is the to zero in to figure out where you want to find the empty space? And then what's your train of thought? And then I'm so curious in how you're buying these companies for zero down and then what you're doing. Like what is kind of the sequence of events?
Yeah. So usually, I look at emerging neighborhoods first, and I think that's I've been offered s- dozens of places in the North Loop and Lower Town St. Paul and Linden Hills. And it's when I look at that, I see a lesser opportunity of making a huge difference in a neighborhood. I'm basically adding to a strong mix of things. I'm not afraid to compete, and I'm not afraid of finding points of differentiation in these neighborhoods. But the Excelsior, when I moved into Excelsior, there were 4 restaurants total on Water Street. Now I think there are 12. So it's when I moved on to when I opened Republic in 2011 on Seven Corners, I would consider this neighborhood. So they survived the basically the effects of like the 35W bridge collapse, the Metrodome, nothing happening on that site for so long, that this corner back in the day was this super vibrant corner, like I think in the 80s, 90s, and then up until basically the Timberwolves and the Gophers and and the Twins started playing at different stadiums. This corner was hot because there were 200 dates a year that the Metrodome was being used, and we're blocks away. So when I entered into that deal at Republic, it was the last year of the Metrodome, and then it was demolished, and there was nothing for 5 years. So I'm looking at this as an opportunity to realign the concept within the four walls of that space with the people who are already parking their cars, who are already sort of occupying that neighborhood. So I took a bar that was called Sergeant Preston's, which it was very successful, and it was there for 38 years. It was in decline when I got it. It was, I think I put $50,000 into it from day one. I opened it 3 weeks after we closed on the deal, and we've quadrupled the sales there because we weren't aligning with the sports. We took out all the televisions. We approached it like we're a block away from the grad school side of the U of M. So we've got a smart person. We were a little bit ahead of the craft beer craze in Minnesota. And then we're surrounded by 6 theaters that between Wednesday, Thursdays, Friday, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday are filled with people who are paying to go to the theater. So that we're looking at a food first craft beer thing to sort of directly tie the brand into what's happening on the neighborhood that wasn't reliant on the stadium. Back in the day, if I would have opened that place in 1985, I would have opened a sports bar there because it made sense. If you kind of watch this thing run its course, you sort of just once again logically step back, say, okay, what did it used to be? Why was it like that? Identifying the audience, and then just basically I use the same tables and chairs, the same bar, the same taps, the same kitchen equipment, and literally almost within the year quadrupled the sales in that location and it was basically just aligning this concept with the people who have already parked their car and or live around there. There were no undergraduate students within a mile of there, but this sort of craft beer, I could sort of see the early signs of it catching on. There are a couple other models in town that I was a big fan of, and I'm like, this neighborhood sort of needs something like this. This is the audience that's there. So to use that as the example, that was 8 years ago, and like I said, the initial investment there was $50,000.
How did you say? Are you going in there to like an owner and like I'm curious on like when you're like some of the negotiations, it sounds like what you were doing with the rents and stuff like that. A lot of creative deal structuring is probably stuff that you've picked up over the years.
Yep.
And so what were the terms and conditions? How were you doing it? And what were the negotiations like?
That one was it went pretty well. It was on the market. So once we know what's available, it was on the market for a long time, which actually I think gives the buyer a little advantage and some leverage. We kind of know once you put something on the market, you sort of know. You probably heard this story too. It's just you've already you're checking out as you're not going to have it anymore. But the longer that goes, I think the better opportunity there is. And we also had the support of the landlord too. So he sort of helped us negotiate that deal, but it was a seller finance deal at the end of the day. So it kept it super, not a whole lot down. And like I said, we sort of saw the opportunity of like, if we can build sales, which happened, I wouldn't say effortlessly, but we got a ton of press. We had a lot of strong relationships and really just made the right moves there to build, sales and get that momentum. And on the best of both worlds, that location too, it's a big facility near a college campus on a pretty busy corner, and it has this humongous patio. So I thought that was a huge opportunity there where you have people around from September 1st to June 1st because the school, and then you also have this draw of this less of a seasonal fluctuation on a college campus because you've got this massive patio. So you've got to draw in the summer when no one's around. So I thought I saw this year-round sort of sales model without the seasonal fluctuations of like a college. Most college bars are busy between September and May, and then most places like on a lake out in Excelsior are busy, in the summer when people are around. So without having to ride out those cash flow, variances, this one was a pretty cool year-round opportunity, which really gave it some legs, especially in the early days.
So you did the seller financing, but like when restaurants are on the market, what kind of multiples and what are the typical valuations like?
Yeah, it's low compared to other businesses. I think the going rate right now is about, 2.5 times cash flow, which is it's low, I think, versus like a service-based thing or a tech, but there once again, it kind of comes back to the point too. I haven't seen a lot of super desirable and profitable restaurants in in the inventory available. Like it's a lot of people that are not doing well. They want out, and or they might be failing and not really
Hmm.
providing accurate numbers. So it's that, I think, too, has been, at least people,
Makes a
some
ton of
people
sense. Yeah.
think I'm crazy when I sell things at their peak. It's it's relatively easy because there aren't a lot of models out there that are like in tip top shape, performing year after year, that could sort of sustain a new owner in any capacity, because it's, once again, there's not a lot of
They're
inventory
bleeding,
and
probably, right?
comparables at available at the time. So I know there's going to be a bunch of them every year to look at. I know that if I go in with a lot of logic and data and analysis of just like the neighborhood and what's missing in that neighborhood, I can make an impact. If I pick an emerging neighborhood, you're almost the hero instead of just being another part of the mix. You could really enhance. You could more or less, you could help neighborhoods by being better and sort of setting the bar somewhere that everyone sort of takes a look. And if I, for Republic, as using that as the example, it's visible. And if I quadruple the sales there, there's no doubt that I made an impact on the neighborhood. But I don't know if I wasn't trying to step on toes or anything, but those are people that were going somewhere else. It wasn't all new people driving way out of their way to come there. These are the same people in the neighborhood that were using
Hmm.
and going to the other options there. So if I didn't create some sort of statement there of like, this is the bar and this is where it should be, I don't think in any way it really hurt. Everyone else around me seems to be doing just fine, if not better. And I created some visibility to when we go on a wait, people spill into other places.
Hmm.
So I think it's that all ships rise sort of mentality, where I was looking for points of differentiation. So that one thing I couldn't have predicted with that place is that it's a beer bar, a craft beer bar on a college campus, but 65% of our sales are food, which is just, I wouldn't have been able to guess. It's usually quite a bit lower than that.
Hmm.
And I'm proud of that. And it just means that we put this sort of food first message into this place that was kind of this notorious drinking establishment before. And the food was the opportunity. If more people come here and eat food, they're only going to drink that much more beer. So
Hmm.
it was a lot of the beer
I
bar
usually do the
model just
opposite.
kind of, yeah, yeah, you do.
I usually drink
I've been guilty
food.
of
I
that.
usually drink, and then the food comes after I need
I'm like, thank God they have food. you know?
it. I, so
So that's a good one. It's a visible one too, and it's I've
I used to
a
go
lot
there,
of
man. That was right by our old office. I used to get my sour beer there.
yeah,
It's Dutchess
yeah,
sour.
Duchess. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great
man.
Belgian
My
beer.
old
It's
CIO turned me on to that. I love it. So I'm curious,
for
man. It's
sure.
like when you like, and I'm assuming because a lot of people, that are familiar with the broker websites, and I'm assuming these things are like going for a few $100,000 or something like that. And so you're going there doing some seller financing. Then when you said that, and that you ended up selling them on the peak, and I don't know if you want to explain how many transactions you've done, but I'm assuming if you maybe give us some color on, okay, so if you bought it for whatever the multiple was, 2.5, but you're not putting any money down, so it's fine. The cash flow and your growth is financing the purchase. So then you're selling it on the high. Is it a bigger multiple? And then are your terms and conditions different as well? So you're getting more cash up front, and like explain kind of the profitability and the return on the investment that you're getting.
For sure. Yeah, they've all been a little unique. I have taken I've sold seven places now. So, but the extremes of all of those were, once again with the approach of at least buying low, selling high. Which is, but when I say sell high too, it's not. There are three of those deals that I financed because I was so confident the brand would keep performing. So
Mm.
I did 5-year financing on two of them, and I feel so good about that. I hesitate because of the foundation I created in the brand. At points of my life, like I said, when each of my kids was born, when I started school, is if I had a revenue stream coming in from somewhere else, and I could kind of identify these points of these things hitting a curve. It's, I've been able to I sold one place for almost 40 times more than I paid. So that was I call it the extreme. They're not always like that.
Yeah.
I've had, in within a year sold a place for, 14. I owned it for 14 months. It was, easily, six figures plus financing back to me. So depends on how long I owned it versus
Mm-hmm.
what I acquired it for. Some of them were just incredibly good deals that I just couldn't say no to, and then a few of them were, this basically just sign a lease and it's yours. They were just empty. So
Mm-hmm.
I basically went in, coat of paint, new menu, staff it, and it's really hard. I contributed some, capital and startup into some of these projects. So, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as the multiples, I'm not always, concerned about that being this strict formula
It's
as
all
it
the
is
cash
just
flow, right?
really good time. Yeah. So they've all been a little bit different on paper. And like I said, I've got some extremes in there that were, I'd say all within my favor, but there, it depends on who the buyer was.
Yep.
It really depends on their situation and what they were looking for out of the deal. So I think I always go into those with an open mind about, I'm here. This is what I've done. This is the history of this place. And this will continue to succeed. And I'm willing to go to bat for you on that, where I'm still friends with everyone I sold a restaurant to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I still stay in touch. I promise them, if you have anything, if you have calls, if you have something come up, like, I'm a phone call away, because I need and want you to succeed, because this is still part of what I created and what I was a part of it. I don't need to cling on to it until I'm super old and can't handle it anymore, because I have made a living off of people waiting too long to sell restaurants. Like, everything I've ever bought at some other point in time was worth way more than I paid. And everything I've looked at that I passed on at some other point in time had a value that was way higher than what they put it on the market for. So that's just the eye opener for me, is the pride and the ego and the factors of just like, I've been wanting to do this since I was a teenager. It's almost irrelevant if you're using logic and just the business and ethics of just like, okay, I could identify a and sort of like an owner operator situation. They think they're getting a good deal and getting a good deal because of its performance. And I'm staying on board to make sure that it continues to succeed. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
no lose situation in here, unless something drastic happens, which it might, or it could, but it hasn't happened to me because of the thoughtfulness I put into who I'm selling it to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another part of it too, where they're just like, anyone will take a check from anyone just to get out because they're so frustrated. My the other arm of this consulting thing that I'm working on after school is done, is to really help people just enter into this process of, like, you're sitting on something that's probably like what you said, it's more valuable than you think. And I can get you there. Like, I can have you take the steps. It's not going to happen overnight, but
Mm-hmm.
I could coach you in the direction of, like, all right, let's get this thing on the rails and get it back into, sort of a profitable nature, to give you the opportunity to maximize. If you really want out, you can't just put it on the market. You're not prepared. It's someone like me would come along and just, not intentionally, but I would have just come along at the right time, where I waited long enough to get the best deal.
Well, it's the same
So
thing with the house, right? I mean, and that's where there's so much parallels between housing and businesses, right? Where, like, the whole point of an inspection is you don't want to pay for something that's broken, right? But
right.
if it's all fixed up, you will pay more. And so, like, there is an equal exchange of value. I think where there's a ton of, bruised egos and such, is when there's, there's false notions of what, and false expectations of what people
Yeah.
should actually get for what they have.
Right. And a lot of people get in over their head. They want their money back. And that one's, I put 500 grand into this place. Well, you show zero profit, and you have a bunch of tables and chairs that they're a dime on the dollar. So those are tough conversations, and I usually try to avoid them. But you have no idea how many situations I've walked through an available business, and the person selling it is wants to retire. with this. They managed it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years sometimes. And they're looking for this top dollar and they've let it go. And it's like, you just have to be able to identify that point in time where you actually have something tangibly, backed by numbers and data to sell. And that's what at least the promise I made to myself is to just not cling on too long. It was like one of my favorite athletes, Minnesota Viking Robert Smith, when he retired after, he led the league in rushing and won a Pro Bowl. He was a Pro Bowl. Everyone's like, why? You're in the peak of your career. It was the most brilliant thing I've ever seen because he was healthy and he left on a high note, and he spun his career into other things where it's like that athlete that stays the 5 years too long is just like their tendency to get hurt or their
joke.
I guess well, yeah, I wanted to try to be a little more diplomatic, but
all I can think about is Favre, right? Where he's like doing razor commercials and playing for the mortal enemy, the Vikings.
Right. And it was just like, it was one of those things that stuck out to me as just like, you know what? It's a brilliant approach. Like he's at the top of his game. Let's let everybody remember what that was. And, for me, I always use that. And I'm not in all that even into sports, but I just remember that as this almost like a case study of like what to do to pivot, to have options. And that's kind of this, people always ask me why I've opened, 11 businesses in 16 years for myself. Why am I getting my MBA right now? It's because I see the next 10 years looking differently than my previous 10. I don't want to do what I do for the rest of my life. I don't want to be 80 years old and sitting in one of my places trying to, figure out how that's going to be my retirement plan for my family. Like I promised myself that I wouldn't overstay my welcome when it came down to relevancy and just my time, in this industry. I mean, the same goes for musicians. People make fun of the
everybody,
Rolling Stones of continuing to tour and stuff, but it's like they actually, I wouldn't use them as the example. They still.
I saw Adam Sandler's coming to one of the small casinos in Minnesota. I'm like, there you go.
But to be really thoughtful and humble and conscious of like, I think there's a window of time for me personally to do this. And then another thing, I guess, that a lot of people don't know, and I appreciate the time to be able to talk about it, is this, the concepts I create too they're very reactive to the space that I see. So I never really build a model out until I walk through an available space. So I don't design something that I have any personal attachment to. I'm actually just building out the model reactively to the needs of that neighborhood or community or street. So if you can be that thoughtful about it, it's not like I've been sitting on a craft beer burger bar model since I was a teenager saying, this is my lifelong dream. I just need a space and I'm going to rock it. I don't care who my neighbors are. I don't care what town it's in. I don't care if anyone's ready for it. Those are when that situation, you are setting yourself up to have your dream get crushed. When I walk into a space, I'm just like, hey, I don't even know what it's going to be. I just want to see it. And I want to see the condition of things. And I want to see what kitchen equipment's there so I know how to draft the first menu. When I start drafting, sketching out the logos and conceptual design, I don't know what it's going to be until I walk through the space. And I think that reactive approach gives me an advantage because this is not none of these restaurants were like a lifelong dream of mine. They were just what I would consider a really good alignment for that neighborhood and what was missing from that neighborhood. So if you can make points of differentiation like that, you've got an advantage because you're not going to get like Bar Brigade is my little French tavern in St. Paul. There's nothing like it around me. There's no French restaurant within 3 miles of that place. So there's no fair comparison. It was like I walked in, I'm like, man, there's an Italian place across the street. There's a deli, there's a burger bar, there's a pizza place. There's all these things. I'm like, well, here's what they're missing. And that's why people love it. And that's why people go. There's no point of comparison anyone can make to what Wild Boar Bourguignon should cost or taste like. Like we drafted a menu around being unique. so I utilized the really good use of space and most of the same furniture, the same exact kitchen equipment. And I changed a couple of those surfaces, tile and wallpaper and paint but that whole project, I put $25,000 into it. So it was, increased the sales from
How
what
do
I
you
gathered.
determine, Maddie, when it's time? So how do you determine when it's time, when it's time, and then explain your process of selling and how you go about doing it?
Yeah, for me though, too, selfishly, I'll freely admit that I when my first kid was born, I was just like, I just want to work less, and I really see this one opportunity of being an amazing dad. I'm literally going to get one chance at this. I had already opened 5 businesses by that time. So I'm like, God, at this pace, I could open 50 businesses in my life, but I have this one shot of being a great. So at I have 2 kids, and at each point that they were, born or soon thereafter, I was like, well, I want to have more time and more flexibility. So I would basically just try to identify which place of mine was good timing for me to move on from. And it was almost reactive too. None of them were ever hit the market not being profitable, not being queued up, for a new operator to come in and make some adaptive changes that help their success. They're all the places that I've sold are still open. They're still thriving, if not busier than when I own them, and I'm still friends with them all. So it's like we have a great, exit plan when it comes down to this too. Is just that alignment of ownership. And when I got up to 7 restaurants this last year, I don't have any business partners. I don't have any investors. So it's also unique in this business to sort of be Han
Solo entrepreneur.
Solo on this deal.
Yeah.
So it's like it gets overwhelming. Things change beyond my control. Like this labor market we're in right now has a set of challenges for my industry, that there is a shortage of cooks and available help, and the places I just sold were all seasonal. I guess it was my wife is a professor. My kids are 9 and 6, so they have summers off. So I had 4 extremely summer heavy seasonal businesses that I was just like, well, you know what, to be the best dad I can be, I need summers off, more or less.
Mhm,
So I like,
mhm.
if that's so when we, identified the buyer for that those businesses, it was actually just more that they're really cool. Took things that were either empty or needed new alignment in a concept or a new operator. A couple of them were food trucks, which has been a great experience. Those were nothing but fun, profitable. Great. I owned 3 food trucks for just about 5 years, and sort of, but they're all so summer reliant,
Mhm.
and so I can't say anything other than selfishly that I have 3 other businesses that are doing great, and I've got a licensing agreement at the airport that really is with Republic, that just it's pretty hands off, but it's a 9-year lease out there. And I look at the kind of like the bigger picture of like, hey, I'm getting my MBA and finishing in May. I've got a sweet family that I love, and I've got tons of things I could do next if I had a little more headspace and a little more time. So the idea that I could sell something, spin it into another business or two, is always the change. Change being the constant for me, always sort of invigorated my
Mhm.
entrepreneurial spirit, and just got me motivated to see what else is out there.
Did you
So
ever
I
decide to get sucked into the real estate in any of these deals?
it's the one. I wouldn't even call it a regret, but I'd say what I know now versus how I would have approached it differently is I would have really made an attempt to at least two of the buildings. I probably would have made a run at purchasing them. There was also this point in my life too that with the idea of me being a landlord versus me being a creative force, it was somewhat limiting at this kind of pivotal point in my life. Like if I would have started down that road pre kid, I would have jumped on it. It would have been fine. I would have been happy with that decision. There are also just days in my life, before I had kids, that I worked a lot, and like a lot of entrepreneurs do, and a lot of restaurant people do. And now I don't want to brag about it, but I have a structure where I've clarified the difference between ownership and employment. I
Mhm.
don't manage anything for myself. I don't work. I'm not overworked. I take a pretty, limited day side, weekday schedule. I basically work, 10 to 3 Monday through Friday for myself, and focus on the things that I need to focus on. And I'm employing and empowering people who are ready to learn and really want to. It was me 20 years ago, basically,
Mhm.
is who I'm helping in a really positive culture and environment, sort of sharing my experience with them from a pretty passive way on the floor. So I don't get roped into too many shifts anymore unless it's an extreme. I had a few days last summer that with 7 businesses up and running, and all of them being
I can
sort of
only imagine.
events and food truck dates, and they're like, who can work today? Just kind of panicky, sort of like, I'll do it. And then, my wife would laugh. She's like, you're bartending where? I'm like, I can't. So it was pretty fun, but it was fun to jump back in too. And it was like, almost like nature. I had done every position in the restaurant business before working for myself. I'd waited tables and bartended and bus tables and washed dishes and managed. And, I'm not a big dude, but I've been a bouncer and a host, so it's like I've
Bouncer your
done,
own play. Is that have you ever done that?
no, I haven't. And maybe no, kind of one zombie pub crawl on Seven
Oh,
Corners. We did have to be there, and
I
we all
actually remember
basically,
that one.
man, it was crazy. And it was maybe the busiest single day I've ever had. Every Republic was one of those days. We basically, I turned into a glorified security because of it's just madness and chaos. So you kind of have to just keep those instincts kick right back in from sort of preventative,
Protect the fort.
crowd, and yeah, just door control. So, but yeah, it's been a great run.
Matty, describe to the audience what you're doing now and what's the best way to get in touch with you.
So right now, for my final project for the MBA, as well as for my own personal benefit. So I've done about 10 years worth of sort of pro bono consulting. I love helping other people, and I was doing it pro bono because I didn't really want to launch that business while I was building my own businesses, because basically be helping my competition. And I thought it gave a strange perception outside looking in, as why would this guy help me? But I'm overly inspired by other people's stories. So my final project for the MBA, as well as what I hope to launch at some point this summer, is this coaching and consulting company. And it's coming from a very good place. My mission is to reduce the failure rate in restaurants, and I can do it. And I've helped a lot of people. Basically, I've saved a lot of people from making huge mistakes. I could help a lot of investors not get into troublesome deals by just getting a glimpse. There's a lot there. I'm working with a really cool data analytics software startup out of Chicago that just launched a product on how they're going to basically give people the information that they should have at their fingertips, but I'd be an extra layer of that, providing solutions to that information. So it's
Oh, cool.
this kind of 3-armed approach of just like, it's more or less, it's kind of a really good natured sort of snapshot of the sort of culmination of my experience and diverse sort of experience within the industry, but really leaning on this data driven solution, because I think a lot of people just don't know their numbers,
So
and
good.
once they have the numbers, they don't know what to do with them to make
Mhm.
adaptive change. So I think I've got a really sort of humble approach to helping people. If I were to do anything differently, I always thought I was going to be a teacher or a coach, and I think it comes from this place where now I have this 24 years of knowledge. I've got this sort of foundation of this MBA experience, which has been nothing but positive, and sort of the structure to how I'm going to spin it into the future is just, I'm really excited about it. It's working on all the fine tuning and details and website and that stuff, but it's not quite there. I want to finish strong with school, and then we're done in May. And then I'd really just I'm not one to let the grass grow around my feet, if you know what I mean. So I'd say
Yeah.
soon thereafter this summer, I'd be taking on accounts, and it's also very, very unique. I don't see a lot of people approaching restaurant consulting for the most part is a pretty front loaded, someone helps someone open and then they walk away when the doors open and these things fall apart almost instantly, where mine is more of this really like just ongoing, affordable, approachable, a kind of extra set of eyes on numbers and fluctuations within those numbers to help people make these adjustments before they become drastic. So I'm coming at it from a more of like, I don't want you to give me a huge check to help you launch a place. I want you to give me a super small check every month so you don't go out of business. Because once again, if I go back to the mission, if I can prevent a handful of them from opening and people making mistakes, it helps my industry. If I can help a bunch of good people who are working hard that don't have a grasp on the data and how to use it to their advantage, I want to get a hold of as many people like that as possible, because those when your food cost goes up 2 points every month and you're not watching, I want to help people pay attention and really provide the sound advice on how to get it back in line. So I'll be doing that. And then this summer, for the first summer in 5 years, we have like 3 or 4 camping trips with my family, and just to get out. We're going to Banff and we're going to Boulder, and we just got a new tent and all this stuff that it's been really hard for me to do with all the seasonal operations that I had. So I'm just like, I'm staring at summer this year as a very different picture.
Like a backpack like when you're in high school and college, like an actual summer.
Like an actual break. So it's kind of the luxury of my wife's job and my kids, at the ages they are, is we could really take advantage of this, those 3 months. So that's happening. And then a handful of projects have come my way. I'm sort of looking at them like pretty passively at the moment, but they're, to say I'm done, I think that'd be almost foolish. I love the 3 places I have. Delicata Pizza, underrated, cool little neighborhood pizza joint in the Como neighborhood. And then Bar Brigade is this little accessible French tavern in Mac Groveland neighborhood. And then I've got that Republic kind of just firing on all cylinders. And then the airport, model just helps, support some of the things that are happening. And then, I'll take on as many coaching and consulting accounts this summer as I can handle, because I truly am inspired by just hearing other people's stories of their startups and their concepts. A few consulting accounts I have right now are almost giving me the confidence that I know I can help a lot more people other than just myself. And it doesn't take a lot of time. It won't take a lot of their money for me to just get them, from potentially going under or getting frustrated where they make bad decisions. So that's my goal, and my hope is I can really make a difference on the industry as a whole. And I'm not talking about just Minnesota. Like this data company too, they're looking a lot bigger than beyond just the state. It's with the access and cloud-based, technology, and sort of the era we're in right now. It's like this is getting a snapshot of someone's business by the numbers first is pretty easy for me to just,
Data's finally
in
there.
a few minutes I can identify problems, but within that I can start to identify solutions too. So I'm looking forward to just getting in a few more businesses to be able to just provide advice and help. So, and that's, I guess, the best way of getting a hold of me. Just hit me up on LinkedIn right now, and then from there I'll be able to communicate when the website launches this summer on how I'm going to pivot that after school.
And we'll have the links in the show notes too for the listeners.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I had a blast, man. This is awesome stories.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. It's really fun to talk about some of this stuff, and I'm really liking your show. I've listened to some episodes, and it's you're helping people at least, frame some things that they might not have thought of, and just giving a lot of good
Context, right? Giving some
context. Yes, it's perfect. So thank you very much.
Thanks for sticking in there. I hope you enjoyed the episode with Matty. I don't know about you, but I definitely have thought about going out and starting a restaurant after listening to that episode and chatting with him. With that being said, if you are interested in the Growth and Exit Planning Accelerator, the 12-month program that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, reach out to me at ryan@gexpcollaborative.com. Otherwise, go on to our website. There's a bunch of information about the accelerator on the website. And with that being said, I will see you next week.